off. You will be on mute. And thank you to many of you who posted questions to Rick with the registration. We will have a Q&A session here at the end of the presentation. Lance, take it away.
Hello, good afternoon or good evening, based on where you're at. I know we've got folks all across the country in different time zones. On behalf of CU Athletics and our Buff Club, I want to welcome all of you to the first state of CU Athletics, first of its kind, and we look to do more of these. As a department, we track where we're at all times with regards to our strategic plan, and we do this through our quarterly progress report, which we call QPR. And obviously with the circumstances and climate we're in, we can't see many of you in person. So it highlighted the fact that we wanted to and needed to share this with you in person, and this Zoom call was the best way to do that. We're going to highlight the successes of our programs, the opportunities that we have with you. We're going to be talking about our entire athletic department as a whole, the current academic standing of our student athletes, some of the programmatic successes that we've had and are having. And we're also going to share with you our more in-depth on our whole student athlete program that we launched this past summer, along with the overall fiscal state of affairs, and address some of the questions that many of you sent in advance. I think we fielded somewhere close to 200 questions, some great ones that we're trying to hone in on, and we'll get to those towards the end of the program, and certainly open it up for a Q&A session. You know, with that, we're really happy you guys are all here. It's good to see so many familiar faces and new faces. It should be a really fun and informative session. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick George. Take it away, Rick.
Great. Thanks, Lance, and good afternoon to everybody. And I'm just going to warn you, I'm going to be a little long-winded. So get comfortable. And please know I appreciate all of you being on this call. And this is really timely because we just put out our rapid report that was about 7 or 8 months late, but we've been a little bit delayed because of the pandemic. Usually comes out in the fall. So we just recently put that out. We also just completed our second quarterly report, as Lance had mentioned. And so I think the timing of this is perfect. And what I thought I would do is really take you through the last 12 months. And as many of you recall, on March 12th is kind of when the pandemic hit us. We had played the night before. It was March 12th. I'll never forget that date. But on the 11th, we got our butts kicked against Washington State and wasn't real happy leaving T-Mobile Arena, and woke up in the morning to a pandemic, and everything kind of changed from there. It was one of the last sporting events in the country, was our game that night. And the Pac-12 canceled the rest of the tournament. The NCAA canceled March Madness, and it just became chaotic in a 12-hour period. We flew back the very next day with the team. We were able to meet with our student athletes at 7 p.m. in the Coors Event Center, or the CU Event Center at 7 p.m. We had one of our team doctors, Dr. Karen Von Bach, there to speak to all of our athletes about the virus and what we knew at that point, because it really wasn't a lot. There were a lot of unknowns. The future was really, we didn't know what it was going to be, but we thought it was important to talk to our student athletes about what this could become. And then we were pretty much in official crisis mode at that point. And the very next day, when we got up, we learned that the campus had shut everything down, and that we were going to go remotely on that following Monday. And that meant that our in-person classes were canceled. Our work was going to become remote. Travel was suspended, and it really turned us upside down, really. And from that point on, it became a year of, I don't know what to call it, but it was a year. And we knew, though, at the very beginning of this, that we needed to prioritize the areas that our student athletes needed to have the support that they needed in their academic, social, and athletic success. And these areas, as you know, are in the areas of nutrition, mental health, academics, career development, sports medicine. We knew these areas really impacted our student athletes and their experience on our campus. So those became important to us. We quickly shifted all of these areas to remote service, which required all of our student athletes and staff to learn to work and study remotely. All academics occurred over Zoom. That included classes, tutor appointments, academic meetings, and Chris Livingston's going to update you in a few minutes on that, and she'll give you a little bit more of an insight on the Herbst Academic, but they did a phenomenal job. We turned our fueling station into a grab and go service. Student athletes would send in their orders online, and we would deliver the meal curbside. We did about 25,000 meals between when the pandemic hit and over the course of the summer. And we are now doing a grab and go in our Crawford Club for all of our student athletes. And just for a perspective, we had 86 student athletes that never left campus that stayed here throughout the course of the summer and the spring. And that meant that we couldn't close down our facilities in their entirety because we still had to support them. The world of mental health also shifted to virtual. Our psychological health performance team, led by Rachel Walker, began meeting with our student athletes remotely. And we saw a huge increase in student athletes seeking their services, given that our student athletes were facing stressors that they had never experienced before. Our mental health team became vital, not that they always weren't. We also had to rehab injuries. So we did appointment by appointment only in our sports medicine area. And we also had to change things that we did in strength and conditioning. And I think some of you will remember videos that we put online of our student athletes doing lifts on trees and carrying around tires and different things to be able to be creative so we could keep in shape, because we didn't know when this was going to return back to some sense of normalcy. But the bottom line is that every single one of our staff members and student athletes had to be very nimble. And I'm very proud of what we have been able to do together over the last 12 years. I think we were successful in this period, in this transition, because of the way we communicated. We thought it was important to over communicate through every decision that we made. And we communicated with our student athletes, but we also, every time we communicated to our student athletes, we communicated to their families. We also communicated with our campus, a lot of you, on what was going on here, because we felt it was important, because things changed daily and we needed to make sure that we updated everybody on where we were. I think the communication has been the backbone of our ability to navigate this pandemic. We also then had to turn our focus to the end of the fiscal year. We lost a significant amount of money because of the cancellation of March Madness. But we had a strong year in football ticket sales and men's basketball ticket sales, which put us in a really good spot. And we were able to save significant dollars with the lack of team travel and recruiting and other things once the pandemic hit in March. And although the year and the fiscal year and the end of the fiscal year was very difficult, we had a great, probably our best year that we've had fiscally since I've been here. And that takes me to this year, which I'll get to in a minute. But we also saw some tragic events over the summer involving George Floyd and others. These were very difficult times for everyone in our country, and our focus really turned towards supporting our student athletes. Our student athletes formed a committee called See United, which is our Racial Justice and Social Change Committee. This committee has representation by both student athletes and staff members, and I think we've made great strides in the areas of diversity and inclusion. We're always looking to improve in this area, and we know we need to continue to push the envelope. We're currently in the final stages of hiring a new associate athletic director for diversity and inclusion that will report to me. And this person's job will be to fully dedicated to improving the diversity and inclusion in our department, which I'm confident will make us stronger. We also had to begin to look towards the future and focus on 21-22 and or 2021 and what that would look at like. And we had to do that not knowing what was going to come next. We put a variety of different models together and what it would look like. But it became evident quickly that we needed to cut our expenses significantly. I decided, and I've stated this on multiple occasions, that we wouldn't touch the areas that worked directly and supported our student athletes. So nutrition, mental health, sports medicine, career development, academics. And I also said that we wouldn't cut sports, but everything else was on the table. We cut budgets significantly, some upwards of 40%, as we were still facing a lot of unknowns, and we had to make some very difficult personnel decisions as well. We had a number of furloughs, we had a number of layoffs, and I can honestly tell you that those were some of the toughest days that I've ever had in my career. Decisions like these, they affect people's lives, families, and you can't ever make these decisions lightly, but unfortunately, these cuts were necessary. We had to do them. We knew that our budget was going to change significantly throughout the year, and we had to be prepared for whatever that was. We also knew that we had to bring our student athletes back to train for their competitive seasons in the fall. So we had to, when the pandemic hit, most of our student athletes returned home, but then they came back. So we had to figure out what our protocols were going to be to keep everybody safe. And one of the things that we did immediately, and once we shut our building down, is we came in and sanitized every area of the 3 facilities that we operate in. And we did a pretty incredible job. I think our protocols and procedures are, a lot of people are using those as the gold standard for what we were able to do. But we required symptom checks when they come in. We took temperatures. We began cleaning everything in our facilities, high touch point areas by the hour. We couldn't have gatherings more than 10 people. And again, this meant for our student athletes as well. So we had to create functional groups that were training that didn't exceed 10 people. And if you think about football with 120 student athletes, for us to be able to get them through the training that they needed at the time, it was 12 hours a day to get that many people through our facilities to abide by the county orders. We worked diligently to establish these protocols. And I think they've worked well from us. As you look at our seasons, we didn't lose a game in football because of what we were doing. Our men's and basketball teams haven't lost games because of what we were doing. And that's something that I'm extremely proud of because I think that's important. We did a lot of testing. And to this date, we've tested 15,000 different tests over the course of this time period. Our student athletes in football tested every day to get through the season. You talk about discipline and things like that. I mean, I couldn't be prouder of our student athletes for what they were able to do. Obviously, these tests come at a cost. We don't exactly know what that'll be. We'll kind of figure that out as we get to the end of this fiscal year, but that's something that we didn't plan for in this budget when we started it. So that's something that we'll have to address at the end of the year. I do want to applaud my executive team for the work that they did to put these protocols in place, namely Miguel Rueda, who oversees our sports medicine team and all of our health and wellness areas, and Jason DePape, who oversees our facilities. I've got an incredible leadership team. We're strong at the top. I can tell you that we've got great people that really care about our student athletes and do an incredible job of putting us in a great place. I mean, we've done some great work in that area. We also didn't want to lose focus on the future and what was ahead. So we put together our 2021-23 strategic plan. And so this was our next 3-year mission. If you recall, 6 years ago, we created our vision to be one of the premier athletic departments in the country. And it was a series of 3-year missions. And this 3-year mission is probably the most important, and I've said this to our staff, our coaches, and our student athletes, the most important 3-year mission, because this is going to really set us up for the future. And if you think about 3 years from now, our TV rights are up, our multimedia rights are up, our Nike agreement's up. We've got all these agreements coming at the same time. So this gives us an opportunity to be in the conversation every day and to elevate our program. So when we get to that point where we have these discussions about what the future looks like, we think that we will be able to position ourselves very well for this to happen in 3 years. So this next 3 years are critical to what we're doing. And what we're focused on is competing for and winning championships. Over the past 7 years, we've done a great job with our fiscal responsibilities. We've managed our budget. We've always been in the black, and I've been really proud of that. We had 1 year we weren't because of the Mike McIntyre, the accounting around that. But we had a surplus this past year. So I feel really good about that. The world-class programming that many of you have allowed us to do has been impactful. But what I looked at is we weren't winning enough. We need to win championships. We need to be part of the conversation on ESPN Game Day during the football season. We need to be on the conversation when Jay Billis and Dick Vitale are talking about the best basketball team in the country. Our women's basketball program's in the best conference in America for basketball. I don't think our conference gets enough respect in football and men's basketball, but in women's basketball, we drive the train, and in most of our other sports. So anyway, we also had some success this past year too, and I don't want to not talk about that. So football, if you think about it, Carl Durrell couldn't even meet individually with his student athletes till probably August or September, where he could meet with all of them. And he never had a spring ball, but we were 4-2, and we played 6 games. We played a game that we had 1 day to prepare for, and we won that game. Our future's bright with him. Our basketball programs, Tad is having one of the best years of our entire basketball history this year, and we've got incredible players doing amazing things. J.R. Payne is doing a great job with women's basketball. We hope to get an NCAA invite, but we will be in the postseason there. And if you just look at this past week, and our women's volleyball and women's tennis team beat the number 12 team in the country. Our women's soccer team beat the number 10 team in the country on the road. Both of our cross-country teams finished second, which in Mark Wetmore's estimation isn't good enough. And Eduardo Herrera won the individual championship for the second year in a row after Joe Klecker won it this past year. Our ski team is also in New Hampshire as we speak for the ski championships this weekend in Richie Rocco's last year. So we're doing some positive things. We're starting to make that step, but it's important for us to be in the narrative and the conversation every year as we go through this next 3 years. And these programs that you're allowing us to put on for our student athletes are going to allow us to be successful. You'll hear from Chris Livingston in a minute, as I mentioned before, but the academic success that we're having is unparalleled, and it's because of Chris and her leadership and her team and what they're doing. The new aspect that I really wanted to talk about was our whole student athlete program, and the whole stands for wellness, health, and an optimal life experience. One thing that we promise all of our student athletes is that we're going to create a world-class experience for them. And that means they leave CU life ready. And that's a term we coined that means that we're ready to take on the real world. And we believe there are 4 aspects of being life ready. That's your physical health, your psychological health, your academic health, and your career health. And we think this whole athlete is going to be something that people are going to emulate, kind of like the life skills program years ago, because there's nothing like it in the country, and we're very proud of moving this forward. And so as we talk about the 4 aspects, the first aspect is the physical health. We know our student athletes experience is donning the black and gold, and in order to do so, the student athletes have to be healthy physically. And our physical health encompasses our sports medicine department, our strength and conditioning programs, and our nutrition program. I believe that our student athletes, from a nutrition standpoint, is the best in the country. We have 3 full-time sports dietitians that are not only responsible for fueling our student athletes, but also complete preseason and postseason body composition tests that determine how physically prepared our student athletes are. What we do from our strength and conditioning and sports medicine standpoint is incredible. And if you think about it, and I joke about this, but Miguel won't think I'm joking, is all of our trainers have become lab technicians. They all know how to test and how to interpret the test and what they do and what it all means. I don't have any clue, but they tell me what it means. And they do an amazing job. And I'm also a believer that somebody, Chris Olson, I think you're unmuted somehow. There you go. Thank you. But anyway, I think we've got some of the best facilities in the country, and I won't go through them. But our staff is really what sets us apart in this area. I mentioned Miguel, who is the co-chair of the Pac-12 medical team. He'll become the chair of that this July. Dr. Podar is the chair of the Pac-12 Brain Trauma Task Force that deals with concussions and others. And then Dr. Stephanie Chu is another one of our team physicians who took Dr. Podar's place on the NCAA Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sport. And she serves on the NCAA COVID-19 advisory panel. So we've got great people that are not only leading our department, but leading in other areas of the country. Another huge aspect of being life ready is the psychological health of our student athletes. When I first arrived here 7 years ago, we had one full-time mental health practitioner working with all of our student athletes. And now we have 5 full-time staffers in our psychological health and performance department. And I have to tell you that about 80% of our student athletes will see one of these practitioners during their career at CU. And so this is an area that is extremely invaluable for us. The stress that our student athletes are facing on a daily basis is significant, and it's been really significant during this pandemic when we were going to play, we weren't going to play, we weren't going to have a season, we are going to have a season. The stress on our student athletes has been incredible, but they've performed at an extremely high level. We also created a Buffs helpline to provide 24/7, 365-day support for our student athletes if they need it. We recently launched a series called Mental Lift Mondays and Mental Training Tuesdays. So we're doing a lot of educational work. We also have a group called the Boulder Buffaloes, which is a group made up of student athletes that are peer advocates for our student athletes, and that can help them if they are struggling and they don't want to go to a coach or go to somebody in our PHP department. So we've done some amazing things in that area. Also, another key area for us is academic health. At the University of Colorado, I really believe that our students are students first and athletes second. 99% of our student athletes, like most schools, don't go on to play professional sports. And we're no different at CU. Our Herbst Academic Center does a fantastic job. Our academic coordinators are awesome. They're incredible. They do great work. They care about our student athletes. And we've had great success over the last few years that Chris is going to talk about. We also know that earning a degree sometimes isn't enough to earn a great job out of college. And that brings us to our last prong of the whole athlete, and that's the career piece, and that's career health. I became very interested in this about 4 or 5 years ago when I had 4 or 5 of our student athletes that came to me and said, I can't find a job. I can't get a job. I said, why? And they said, well, because I don't know what I want to do. I haven't had any practical experience and I don't know what my degree will allow. So now we've created what we call the Leadership and Career Development Program. And we think it's really important. Dave Callan, Lauren Unrein lead that program. They do a phenomenal job. I think we're leaders in what we're doing in that regard. We have a program called Buff with a Brand that as we go into this name, image, and likeness space is going to be really valuable for us. We went from 1 to 3 time full staff members, and many of you have supported this area, which is extremely important for us. We're providing internship opportunities for our student athletes. We have a website that they can put their profile on that businesses can look at to help and maybe offer them internships and jobs. We're doing hand-on experience. We have unique partners in our community like Ball Corporation, Google, Aero Electronics, and other. We also know our student athletes are busy and have schedules. So we're doing what we call Lunch with the Buff, where we bring in representatives from different companies and our student athletes can sit down with them and learn about their business. So we're doing a lot in this space to make sure that our student athletes are ready and life ready when they leave CU. One very unique aspect of this program is the research area. And I mentioned Dr. Teresa Hernandez, who kind of leads that with Miguel and the research that we're doing. And the concept that they have allows us to collaborate with campus and other areas of outreach. We currently have projects underway with campus that are looking at concussions, sleep, mental health of our student athletes. And we think the research component of this is going to set us apart. I'm a huge data nut. I love to see it. I don't know what the hell it means most of the time, but I love to see it. Having data is really important. And we partnered not only with Dr. Hernandez and some other professors on campus, but we've also partnered with a group called Kittman Labs, who's collecting the data, providing analysis, and helping us to get that advantage to make our student athletes better, and also to give us a competitive advantage. I talk about a 2% advantage all the time, and I think this partnership that we have with Kittman is going to allow us to do that. They're going to provide some data points that hopefully give us some data points on injury prevention techniques that we can utilize. They're going to create dashboards for our sports and for our different positions that we can look at and get some really good positive things out. So I think this whole student athlete program is significant. It's going to set us apart, and this is going to be a real focus of us over the next 3 years. That's going to allow us to continue to get better athletically as well. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is our budget this year, because I think it's important you know that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Chris. And I'm going to probably keep you on until 10 after 5 our time, just to give a little more time for your questions, because I really want to hear what you have to say. But look, I mean, it's pretty simple. Our two biggest revenue streams are ticket and conference distribution, right? So we lost about 27 million in ticket revenue, not having a football and a basketball season. That's reality. We also lost probably, and we don't know the final number, but I'd say somewhere between 16 and 18 million from conference and NCAA distributions this year. So right there, we're down $45 million on the revenue side. And as you know, we've had to make some very difficult decisions to get that down. So if you think about it, we went from a budget of 90 million in revenue last year to 45 million this year. We went from expenses last year of 86 million to 65 million right now. And look, there's a lot of areas that we haven't been able to cut because we're still providing for our student athletes. So all these key critical areas, you know, we're not like a business that can shut down and save everything. We still had to provide the support for our student athletes. And I got to tell you, it's a generosity from many of you on this call that have allowed us to be successful and allowed us. And if you look at the end of the year, when all these numbers are in the bank and they're done, we'll be one of the lowest deficits around the country. And it's because we've been really good stewards of fiscal stewards of your resources that you provided us and other areas that we've been able to do. We promised our student athletes that we wouldn't take away from anything that they're doing. And I can honestly tell you that today we're doing as much or more than we ever have. And it's because of the generosity of many of you on this call. That being said, I'm very confident about next fall. I think things will be closer to whatever normal is. And we don't know what that's going to be yet. So we'll plan for different scenarios. But we're going to be good fiscal stewards of our resources, and we're going to make the best decisions for our student athletes and our athletic department. We're going to need your help, of course. And we have an annual giving day on April 1st, and that's a great opportunity for people to support what we're doing. If you have friends out there that are buffs that aren't really connected to the program, let us know who they are, because it's important that we build these people around us. But we're going to continue to march forward. At this point, we know that even though there's been a lot of negatives to this pandemic, we've also learned a lot. We've also found some efficiencies. We've also found a way that we can perhaps work better as we move forward. And I've been saying this from day one, and I know I'm an optimist, but we're going to be better on the other side of this. We've had some really good news recently as it relates to the vaccine distribution. And then I'm confident by the fall, we'll be able to experience life closer to normal on the back end of this pandemic. I'm just so you know, I'm planning, for those of you that were wondering, I'm planning to have fans in Folsom and the CU Event Center, starting with the spring football game. I'm also planning on a full stadium this fall. But again, that's my optimistic side. But we'll also plan for a 50, 70, and a 90% capacity in our budgeting as we move forward. And a lot of it has to do with our state and county guidelines that we have. I can't wait for you all to see us play in this coming fall in person. Can't wait to see some of you in person coming to visit you to talk about what we're doing and to have gatherings that are more than a couple people with 6 to 12 feet apart. Can't wait for that. I can't wait to see Coach Durrell with a full year and a spring practice, what his football team will look like. But I can see light at the end of the tunnel. And I can tell you, I'm excited about it. The state of CU athletics is very positive moving forward. And we're all excited about what's ahead. I want to thank you again for being here this afternoon, and thank you for your generosity. It's greatly appreciated. And I'm looking forward to see you all in person shortly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Livingston, who's our Executive Senior Associate Athletic Director, who oversees our Herbst Academic Center and Scripps Leadership and Development Program. So Chris, take it away, and we'll be back in a few minutes for some questions.
Great, thanks, Rick. Thanks for everybody here today. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm pretty passionate about what I do, so if I get loud and excited, please forgive me, but I've got some great stuff to share with you. So just a few areas that I'm going to touch on. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the academic staff, the changes that we made that we were forced to make because of COVID, some of the great results that we've seen, and then what we feel that we're going to do post-pandemic with our operation. So we currently have 16 staff members who provide academic support services for our 374 student athletes. We're currently fully staffed. And what we do in the Herbst academic semester is each semester we do an analysis to determine if we have any gaps in the supply and demand of our resources, including and especially our human resources. I'm big on human resources. And Rick has always been very supportive of our efforts, providing the resources that we need. And again, it's because some of the generosity of many of you on this call, so we really appreciate that. So as Rick mentioned, since March 13th of 2020, we had to quickly make changes in our operation. We didn't compromise on any of our services or our resources, but we did change the delivery of each. Almost all of our services have been delivered remotely for the past year. That includes all of our tutor sessions. That includes student meetings with our staff of academic coordinators, academic mentors, and learning specialists. We all had to become very knowledgeable on electronics and Zoom, and we were helping the students trying to figure out, I know we've got some faculty on this call, and faculty were trying to figure out how to deliver their classes, so we all had to work together to make that happen. We made quite a few facility changes. We have about 17,000 square feet in the Herbst Academic Center, which is located in the Dell Ward Athletic Center. And we spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time with Jason DePape in facilities, and we ended up removing seating and removing computers so that we could create social distancing spaces for the students to use. We currently can accommodate 60 students at one time, and that's having removed 65 seats. So in terms of our computer lab, our large study hall, our small study hall, our tutor rooms, our presentation room, our media room, we all had to make changes. And now it was just one seat, one table, one student. And they now have to sign up for each of their seats if they want to use a space on any given day. And currently, on average, we have about 20 students a day who use our spaces Monday through Friday. But that doesn't mean that those are the only students that we're working with, because again, we're doing most of our delivery still via remote and via Zoom. So one thing to note, because of the pandemic, the group of Pac-12 academic directors we've met every single week since March of 2020. And we're a very close group. We support each other, we offer ideas. Most times we're the only ones that know what each other is going through, so we bounce things off of each other. And unlike coaches who keep their recruiting ideas secret, the academic directors share everything. We share best practices with each other all the time, because we all want each other's students to stay eligible and to graduate. So that's been really cool for us to see. In addition, The Pac-12's directors and coordinators of tutoring have been meeting weekly for the last 8 months. And so again, just sharing best practices. And here's one example that we got from one of our peers in the Pac-12, and we've instituted it, and it's been a great idea. So for our student athletes to have a tutor session, the first few months we'd say, okay, you go on to this Zoom session, the tutor meets you there, and you have the session. Well, what if the student doesn't show? What if the tutor was a little bit late? We might have been late getting that information. Based on information that we heard from one of our Pac-12 colleagues, we now have hired a student who's one of our attendants. And if every student and tutor who's going to meet from 10 to 11 in the morning, they all sign into the same Zoom session, and then our attendant sends them to their own room. So everybody's going to their own room, and we know immediately if we have a student athlete who's late. We know immediately if we have a situation with the tutor. So that's been kind of neat, just to share ideas like that so we can improve our operation. So in terms of results, I think you're going to be pretty happy with all this information. If you just take, so what happened in the spring was the university, as all universities did nationwide, they changed some of their rules that benefited students because it was such a traumatic and there was turmoil and they didn't know exactly what was happening or how it was happening. The university made some changes and said, you can take any class that you're taking and be graded as pass fail. So you could get just a passing grade and you get a P. If you passed it, it didn't affect your grade point average, you could move on into your next classes. So that was great. Also, they allowed students to drop classes at the end of the semester at a later date. So with those two different changes, we saw our GPAs rise pretty significantly. We were excited, we were glad, because what they went through, it should have been that way. So for all of our comparisons, Rick and I have talked about it, we've thrown kind of those out just to not to have that as one of our comparison semesters. So now I'm going to tell you what we did in the fall. Because the fall, the university didn't give us those breaks. They didn't give the students those breaks. And here's what we did for the fall. We had the highest GPA for a semester GPA in the history of our program at a 3.153. So that's every class that every student athlete took in the fall semester, and the GPAs, we hit 3.153. 9 of our 15 teams earned their highest fall GPA ever. What's better than that, I think, is 13 of our 15 teams posted semester GPAs above 3.0. 13 of our 15 teams. Now, one of those teams that didn't hit 3.0 is the football team. But guess what? They had their best fall GPA ever. So really the students, I couldn't be more proud of them and what they did, because as Rick said, what the fall was just a constant not knowing what was going to happen next. We would literally be in a meeting where they think they're playing a game and then they're not playing a game. Football, and one of our student athletes, you might have heard the story, Carson Wells, decided, oh, we're starting the season, we're not going to play. So he loads up in fall semester, takes 19 credits. And then guess what? We play. And so he had to go through 19 credits while he's still playing and had a great GPA. He was well over 3.0. So some of those examples were just fantastic. Our cumulative GPA is every course that every student athlete has taken while they've been at CU. Our cumulative GPA is currently 3.128. Again, the highest cumulative GPA on record. And 14 of our 15 teams have a cumulative GPA above 3.0. So we're just heading in such a great direction. And it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work on the students. We rely on the coaches to help us out if we need to hold somebody accountable. The Herbst Academic Center staff is putting in time and overtime, and everybody's committed to helping these students be successful. Another area where we see great success is our graduation success rate. So our current one-year graduation success rate is 95%. And the GSR, the graduation success rate, is an NCAA formula that counts scholarship student athletes. And the rate that I just gave you are those scholarship student athletes who started at CU in 2013 and graduated within 6 years. The NCAA always allows 6 years to graduate. So this formula counts transfers who come in, students who start mid-year, and allows us to remove student athletes who transfer out but are otherwise academically eligible, because we know that student athletes often transfer for different reasons than a non-student athlete would transfer. Non-student athletes don't have this thing called playing time. And a lot of times a student athlete might go, oh, I'm not getting the playing time that I want. I'm going to transfer. Maybe the grass is greener over there. We know it's not always true, but as long as they're eligible and they're transferring to another institution, we know that they're going to graduate from there. So our graduation success rate of 95%, we're really proud of that. And I'm hoping you're proud of that as well. Our current 4-class average for graduation success rate is 93%. So if you're looking at the last 4 years who started 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013, giving them each 6 years to graduate, we're hitting 93%. So post-pandemic, what do we look like? What do we think? What we do is we conduct a full analysis after every semester. We'll do that again. We're going to talk about what we've learned, what was successful, what didn't work well, and how we can move forward. So for example, prior to COVID, we had a very strict policy that all of our tutor sessions had to be on site in the Herbst Academic Center with the tutor and the student athlete in the same space. They couldn't go to the library or a coffee shop or a dorm room. They had to be on site. Well, we were forced to learn how to deliver a different way. And we're forced now to do it remotely, and we really liked what we're seeing. We currently are able to hire more tutors and provide more tutoring sessions remotely, and we're able to match students at times that the tutors and the students can meet together. So currently we have about 90 tutors on our staff, and these are CU students, graduate students, juniors and seniors in their particular programs. But we're learning that somebody might live in Denver, and we can have a student that's here in Boulder, and they can do that tutoring session at 7:00 p.m. and it's convenient for both parties. And that's definitely something that we'll continue to work with. So those are some of the things that we're doing in academics. Now I'll turn it over to Michelle Bell.
You know, and as Chris said, as we celebrate those successes, it is from a lot because of the hard work of our staff. But again, as donors, season ticket holders, your seat donations go to help fuel our success. So again, you get to celebrate those successes because of your contributions. You know, we had well over 200 questions that came in. So I'm going to try to consolidate some of them. The two big ones that everybody was looking forward to having Rick address were some of the things around COVID and the Pac-12. So what I'll do is I'm just going to, Rick, just ask you a couple of these questions around COVID. And then we'll get into a little bit more exciting stuff. You know, compared to the other Pac-12 schools, how did CU work the COVID-19 issue so successfully? And is there a plan to get all of our student athletes vaccinated? And how will we do that?
Well, look, I mean, the student athletes will certainly have a choice on vaccinations. We will encourage that, and just like we'll encourage our staff to get those. But you know, so we'll educate them obviously on getting the vaccination and what that does. And I got my Johnson & Johnson last week, so I'll be done here shortly. I guess it pays to be older than 60 right now, so I'm excited about that. You know, we've been good with this because we've got a great leadership team in our department that have worked really well together. We've been very thoughtful. We've been very nimble. We've communicated quite a bit on our protocols, and you can see the success that we had with our student athletes being able to compete. And you know, we come to work every day to make sure that they have a great experience. And when they couldn't play, it was really difficult, but we wanted to put ourselves in a position that they could compete, because that's one of the reasons why they came here. So I think we're seeing some of that pay off with the success that our student athletes have. But you know, we've done a great job because we've got a great team that's been very thoughtful. We've collaborated with campus and the county throughout this ordeal, and we'll continue to do that as we navigate this moving forward.
Do we have an idea of how many seniors are expected to stay for that extra year of eligibility?
No, not at this point. I had a head coaches meeting yesterday, yesterday with our coaches and told them that, we'll have these discussions at the end of the year. And just for everybody's information, it's permissible language. It doesn't mean that just because they're a graduating senior, they can have another year. It's permissible, meaning that we can do it or we can't, or we won't do it. And so really some of it's going to depend on resources. Just as an example, football's got 4 graduating seniors and you're only allowed 85 scholarships in football. They'll actually have 89 because 4 players are coming back again for their senior year. And the cost of each of those is about $65,000 a piece. So just in that alone, you're talking about $260,000 of additional scholarship dollars that we'll need just in those 4. Tad will meet with his team at the end of the year. JR will do the same, as will the rest of our coaches. And then we'll have a discussion on what fits and what works in our budget.
So, you mentioned that you were a rose-colored glasses and glass half full. You mentioned that you are optimistic that everybody can be there and you want everybody. But let's say, what do you anticipate it to look like fall? If there is partial attendance, is it masks? Is it proof of vaccination? And how do you go about determining the percentage of season ticket holders who can be there?
Well, look, that's why we've started so late with our season ticket process for football. We don't have the answers to all those questions yet about vaccinations and all these other things. If you think about last year, we were in a much different place. We didn't know anything. I think we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. I know in Texas and some other places that they're talking about 100% capacity. And is that realistic for us? I don't know. Will people wear masks? I think some people will continue to wear masks. Look at the flu numbers are down because people are wearing masks and it protects from that. So, we'll encourage that, but what the county and the state allows us to do will be in coordination and cooperation and collaboration with them. And as we get through the summer, we'll know a little bit more about that. But again, we're going to plan for 100%, 90, 70, and 50. And as that becomes a little clearer, we'll make sure that we communicate with this group in particular, but the rest of our season ticket holders. But you can expect next week that we're going to go out for renewals for our season tickets for those of you that are going to come. I think it's going to be a great year for football, great year for our basketball programs. And we're going to start that next week. And we're going to sell tickets and we're going to provide great support for our student athletes.
And there was that question around season tickets. If you rolled over your season tickets, is there anything that you'll need to pay this year? And anything that you need to know about how the process will work?
No, if they rolled over their tickets, the ticket office will communicate with them, and our team down there will communicate with those that rolled over their tickets for this year. I think the one thing that's different, and I know there was a question about this, about the Texas A&M game. Just to be clear on this, I want everybody to understand this. This isn't a CSU game. CSU had control of 40% of the tickets. Whatever agreement that was made, that when I got here, we inherited, they got 40%, which included the sideline seats. And so a lot of our fans said, well, can't get the same ticket that I can there here. Well, we control all the seats in the stadium. We'll have both sidelines if we have enough Buff fans to be able to fill both of those sidelines. And the one thing that's different, and the reason we did it this year, and we've been talking about this since we created this matchup, is that it gives us an opportunity on a different stage. We wouldn't have done it had it been a 6-year or a 6-game home schedule. But since this was a different scenario for us, having a 7th game, we felt like we could do it there. We felt like our home schedule in Boulder was still going to be significant with Minnesota, USC, Washington, and then Arizona and Oregon State. We felt like that was as good a schedule as we've had at home, in addition to the Texas A&M game. So that's why we made that decision. What you'll see is the 6-game deposit that you've moved forward. There will be also a thing on your schedule, on your ticket, that'll say number of tickets you want for the Texas A&M game, and and we'll communicate that to you as we move forward. But that's why we did it this year. I know there was some question about that, because we control all the tickets, we control all the revenue. It helps us in a time where we need the resources to be able to do the things that we need to do to support our student athletes. And so it's the same amount of games at home. It just happens to be one extra game in Denver that we think is going to be a national broadcast game. It's 9/11. It's 20-year anniversary of 9/11. Playing Texas A&M, we think that's significant for our program.
I think everybody's getting excited about that one. It really is a good segue into, we had a lot of questions around the Pac-12 commissioner's job, but how the segue is, how do we improve those conference media revenues?
Well, I think our whole conference needs, there's a lot of areas of improvement. And I'm not being critical of our conference, but and again, certain things have happened. The pandemic certainly didn't help. But we have to, again, we got to be part of the conversation in that college football playoff selection room. We've got to be on game day. Our conference does. We've got to be thoughtful and think about playing that 10 a.m. Mountain game on Fox that gives us exposure all day on all the networks talking about our game. And we've got to be thinking about that. We've got to do a better job of articulating the value of our conference. If you look at basketball right now, we're the highest ranked team at 23 in the country. Are you kidding me? I mean, we should be in New York talking to our media partners saying, in the media out there that says, why is that the case? I mean, we've got great basketball in this conference with USC and Oregon and us and UCLA and others. I mean, it's a tough conference. So we have to do a great job there. We've got to look at our networks because, frankly, you can't, if our games are on the Pac-12 networks, other than those of you that buy it to get it, there's not many that are getting our broadcast, and that hurts us from a national perspective. And so we've got to be thinking about that too as we move forward. So I think, the person that comes into that job, I think it's a great opportunity because I think there's a lot of upside in making this conference better. I think this is the right conference for us, but we need to elevate this conference, and we need to elevate the resources that we're getting from the conference in our multimedia rights deals, our tier 1 deals with Fox and ESPN, and our corporate partnerships.
So there were quite a few questions about the search for Larry Scott's replacement around, would you prefer a former AD? Would you prefer a media executive to run the conference? And why aren't ADs on the conference's athletic executive committee versus school presidents and chancellors?
Well, that's the last one's a really great question. I think there should be athletic directors on there. And if you ask me, I think, what we need is a strong decision maker. We need somebody that can communicate with a variety of different people, including CEOs and media executives. Do I think it needs to be a media person? Absolutely not. Somebody's got to have good negotiation skills, got to know the landscapes, got to have a great consultant that's working with you. I think an AD would be the perfect person for that role because you got to know what's going on campuses too, and how they operate and how they function and what their needs are. So I think, if I was asked the question, I'd say we need an AD, somebody that has an AD or on-campus experience and has the ability to be really good at sales and negotiating, because you got to sell this conference, you got to sell our networks, you got to sell our basketball and football and women's basketball and all of our Olympic sport programs to the national audience. Because sometimes, like we're going to play a 9:30 game Mountain Time, 11:30 Eastern Time for our first and second round games at the Pac-12 tournament. I'm not sure how many people on the East Coast are going to watch us play that, particularly on the Pac-12 networks.
You're not kidding. You're not kidding. Do you think do you have 3 top priorities that you think the commissioner, the new commissioner should focus on?
Well, look, I mean, I think the first thing that they need to do is understand the landscape of our conference. They really need to focus on the network, the multimedia rights deals, I mean, that's what I would do. I mean, look, you should have a 30, 60, 90-day plan. You ought to figure out where we want this conference to be, meet with your constituents, the ADs, the faculty athletic reps, the presidents and chancellors. And I do think that the president or the new commissioner needs to have the autonomy to run the conference.
So we're going to move along. People wanted to know, is there any news on Ralphie or Richie's, the ski coach replacement?
Wait a second, you want Richie or Ralphie?
Both.
So look, Coach Rokos is in his last NCAA championship, and he's meant a lot to this university. 31 years of service here. He's done an amazing job. Yeah, we've been interviewing candidates for the job. We hope to finalize our search by the end of next week, and I'm excited about that. This is a great job. We asked Bill Marolt and Bruce Gamble to help us in our search. Mindy Sclero, who's in our academics, who's a sports supervisor, and Tracy Tripp, they've done an amazing job of conducting this search, and we will have something to announce probably in the next 10 days.
And anything on
And as
Ralphie?
far as Ralphie, she's going to be great.
Yes, she will. She's our home girl. So quite a few questions around recruiting. You know, some of the top ones here. How have the COVID playing restrictions impacted recruiting of CU student athletes? And how can we get more consistent resources and money for football and basketball recruiting?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question, and I'll talk about, but here's what I would say. If I'm Tad Boyle, I never want to go on the road recruiting. I never want to go in a home. He had his best recruiting class. He won the golf championship out of Boulder Country Club, and he's having one of the best years ever. So he can stay home as far as I'm concerned. But you know, for the rest of our coaches, you know, we do have to create more resources, both human and financial. Carl and I just had a discussion about 2 hours ago on some needs that he has for us to move forward. It's all about recruiting. You know, we need to get people, student athletes and their families on our campus again. You know, but we've got to be very aggressive in this. We've got to be better in social media. We've got to be better in our graphics department in those areas. We got to provide that support. But really, you know, what we have to sell here is easy. We just got to get in front of the people. We got to let them see it. There's no place like Boulder. You know, we're the most iconic stadium in the country, Folsom Field. And, you know, we just got to get people here. We're doing great things academically. The whole athlete program is going to set us apart. I think we've got everything to sell. We've just got to be able to have the resources to be able to be in multiple places at one time and provide our coaches the human resources that they need as well.
Absolutely. Is there any interest in selling the naming rights to Folsom and or the Event Center? And are there any chance for some capital improvements, primarily for Folsom, anything over in the Event Center as well?
Yeah, so we're actively in the market looking for naming partners. Now, we will never rename the field because it's Folsom Field and it'll remain that. But it could be the stadium, whatever the name is, at Folsom Field, and we're actively looking at that. We're looking for a naming partner on the Champion Center. We're looking for a naming partner on the Event Center. We're in conversations with some on these areas. We need to, you know, one of the things I'd like to do before I leave here in the next few years is I'd like to fix the west side of the stadium. I'd like to fix the Event Center. And I think that'd be a great complement to what we were able to do in the Champion Center and the programmatic needs that our student athletes have had. So I'm hopeful over the next 4 or 5 years that we can address all of those issues. You know, we still got sound system in the facility. And the thing that's disheartening for me is that, you know, we were in a great position this past year from a fiscal standpoint. We were doing great things and we were going to have an incredible, and then we give it all back to this year. And I failed to mention earlier that our deficit will be somewhere between $18 and $20 million that we'll finance through our media rights with the conference. So you won't see an impact. We won't cut back in certain areas, and we've tried to be as diligent as we can as it relates to expenses.
Well, that was a segue into the questions was the 2021 operating deficit and what did it look like at this point? And several people on here asked how that we can help. One question was, how is the one campaign helped, and does all the money go to the athletics department?
And the answer to that, as you know, because you're overseeing it, is it does go to the athletic department. And the one thing I'm not going to ask anybody to do is fund our deficit, right? It is what it is. I mean, it's a pandemic. It's tough. It's been difficult on a number of businesses. We'll get that figured out. What we need support and help in are all these different initiatives that we have as it relates to the whole athlete, as it relates to recruiting. Those are the things that are going to be tangible, that it's going to allow us to have success. I mean, we got this great facility here, and it's been incredibly beneficial to our ability to recruit the top tier athlete. And we've got to set our sights higher too. I happen to think this is the best job in the country. And it's because of where we live, how we live, the conference that we're in, and the people that we surround ourselves with. So, we just need your support in the programs that we've been talking about, the whole athlete, academics, career, mental health, sports medicine, you name it. I mean, those are the things that are going to allow us to provide this experience for our student athletes that is going to resonate into big time success as we move forward. Because again, we got to position ourselves. You never know about conference realignment, all these other things. We've got to position ourselves in the next 3 years to be a very big target for our media rights and all the other things that are on the plate in 23, 24.
Well, as we're getting kind of close to the end here, I'm going to wrap it up with this question of how often is the name, image, and likeness working group meeting? And will there be federal name, image, and likeness legislation passed before state laws kick in this summer?
Boy, it's going to be really hard for them. And again, I'm on the NIL federal committee. I've been on it. I was told it'd be 3 months, and I think it's been 3 years. But we're still working through. We just had a meeting yesterday on that, and there's still some things that we've got to iron out and that we've got to put in front of the membership. But I also think that the Supreme Court is looking at the Alston case and the transfer issue, and mostly the Alston case and that's tethered to paying student athletes for educational benefits, is what they call it, up to a certain dollar amount. And so I think with the Supreme Court having that case, I don't know that there will be a lot of movement, even though there's a lot of bills out there federally from different senators and congressmen and women that are out there. So, we're looking at it. We're trying to navigate what that looks like, but there's also looking at an antitrust exemption for the NCAA, which we've historically had, that's been beneficial. So again, there's still a lot to know on that. It'll be interesting because you can't have 50 different rules in 50 states because the imbalance in recruiting and competitive advantages and those kind of things. There has to be a national framework. So I'm hopeful that, and again, you got a new administration, so you've got different balances of the houses have changed. So where this all goes, they've got a lot on their plate right now. I don't think NIL is the top initiative for them. So it, really depends on, where we can get maybe some bipartisan support for something that makes sense moving forward.
We had quite a few questions. So if we didn't answer any of your questions, feel free to shoot us an email at buffclub@colorado.edu, and we'll try to make sure that we get those questions or concerns answered for you. But Lance, why don't you wrap us up?
Before he does that,
Sure.
thank you and go Buffs.
Tough act to follow. I'm impressed with this group, staying on the time plan that we had. So I know we're a couple minutes over. I know Rick had somewhere to go, another meeting to jump to at 10 after the hour. I want to thank our group. There's a lot of hands that made this particular event go, a lot of voices that were a part of this. And I want to thank our CU team and our support staff for helping us put this together. This is something we've discussed for a long time. I certainly hope it was informative, insightful for all of you. I hope you all feel that our successes are your successes, as you are all the pillars and foundation for everything we do, from your generosity and support and resources that you've helped us, you've provided to us in putting on these programs that we have always said will be our top priority for our student athletes, and we'll continue to make sure that these are our top priority moving forward. Certainly, you've all been grateful in your financial support, and moving forward, we're not going to deviate from that. We'll rely on you all as much as we have in the past, and probably more so moving forward. But as you heard throughout this past hour, between the One campaign, our whole student athlete program that we launched this summer, and the planning for our annual Giving Day, April 1st, we're going to continue to ask for your guys' support. And if it's not a point in time where you guys can support us financially, bring us more and new friends. We want to grow all these Hollywood Squares. So for the next time we do this, we have doubled this number. And I've got a great team and staff behind me that is able and willing to talk to anyone and everyone that's got a passion for CU athletics and is here to support them. So again, this was recorded. We're going to send it out. If anybody had to leave early, I want you to get everything from this. And if there's any additional questions that come after this, please send them in. We hope to see all of you very soon, live and in person, where we can shake your hand, give you a hug in a safe distance, and cheer on our Buffs as we go into the postseason for many of our team sports. So thank you all for your time, and go Buffs.
Go Buffs.